Hello. Assalamualaikum, sir.
जी वालेकुम अस्सलाम.
Sir, Assalamualaikum. How are you, sir? I hope you are doing fine.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, sir. So the audience is here and we are waiting for you to start. So the platform is yours.
Right. Thank you so much. Let me share my screen first. Okay, so I hope my screen is visible to all.
Yes, sir. It's really good.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Hassan Syed and the entire team for inviting me to speak with wonderful students. Just a brief introduction about me. My name is Waqar Alisha. I'm actually doing PhD in applied linguistics at the University of Jyväskylä, Finland, and I'm working as a lecturer at the Center of English Language and Linguistics, Mera University of Engineering and Technology, Jamshedpur. So, in today's lecture, we are actually going to talk about critical discourse perspective on school textbooks, because this is my area of my PhD and area of my interest. So I have 1 hour, I believe. So I have thought to make it simple and try my best to make it useful to all of you. I'm starting with a very recent book, not recent, but maybe just 5 to 6 years old, and which is very helpful for people who are interested in textbook studies. This book, the Palgrave Handbook of Textbook Studies, it was actually published in 2018. And this textbook was actually published by one of the institute in Germany, George Eckhart Institute, which is actually known for its research on textbook studies. So we need to start with understanding the theoretical approach of textbook, for example, how to theorize textbooks. For example, most of the people globally, they think that textbooks are particularly they are like official documents, and they are like pedagogical resources which are used by teachers in the classrooms. But scholars who work in the textbook studies, they have like different theorizations on textbooks. For example, one of the theoretical approach, or one of the theory of textbook that was developed by Horn, which is also mentioned in this book actually that I have brought here, and it implies approaches stemming from discourse theory, media analysis, and sociology of knowledge. So we have to understand that when we want to talk about textbook studies, we have a number of theoretical schools. We have a number of schools of thought that actually have interest in understanding textbook discourses. So it's not only discourse theory itself, but we have a media analysis, we have a sociology of knowledge perspective, and currently we have, for example, learning analytics. So a number of theoretical schools, they actually study textbooks. So for example, in my lecture only, I would be focusing on critical discourse perspective. So this is a scholar, Horn basically described textbooks in a way that, for example, textbooks are like they are informatorium, and they are pedagogicum, they are politicum, and they are constructorium. So these 4 words are very important if we want to understand the theory of textbook, for example. The first thing that comes in our mind is textbooks are actually source of information. So they provide information to learners, they provide information to teachers, and they are used in the schools as a pedagogicum, like they are used as a pedagogical resource for teachers. So these are the basic functions of textbooks that are used in schools. So source of information, and then they are used as pedagogical resources. But they are not only these two functions of textbooks, but if we want to understand deeper into theory of textbooks, we need to understand these two other important functions. For example, Hone described like a politicum. So textbooks are also politically motivated. So textbooks basically they bring certain political ideologies of any country, for example, or maybe the global political discourses, or maybe their national political discourses. So textbooks are never neutral, but they always bring with them certain political orientations or political discourses. And then we have the fourth word, that is the constructorium. That means that textbooks, basically, they are used to construct uh, what they construct our perspectives. They actually help us make sense of the world around us. They shape our consciousness. So from this perspective, we can maybe say that textbooks are not actually only source of information, or they're not only pedagogical resources, but they are political documents. They bring certain political motivations in the classrooms, and then their function is to construct certain perspective of learners, or even to construct the perspective of the teachers as well. This is the basic theory of the textbooks, and if we look into this book basically that I have mentioned here, the Handbook of Textbook Study, you will come to know that how textbooks have been theorized actually, how school textbooks, they are actually viewed differently by different scholars. So I thought to bring this very important information for you all. This is actually the Lebanese Institute for Educational Media, George Eckert Institute. This is one of the well-known international textbook research institute in Germany. And this institute actually works closely with UNESCO to design textbook guidelines. I was also part of this last year for 2 weeks, and I came to explore how this institute works in the textbook research basically. It actually focuses on three important areas in textbook discourses, in textbook studies. For example, one of the important key research area in this institute is digital transformation, because we know that now because of this digital revolution, the concept of textbook is changing with the time. It's not only now the physical resources used by teachers in classroom, but now we have digital teaching materials as well. So basically, this institute also works to look at how these digital resources are used in teaching. And then the second area of research by this institute is practices in schools and lessons. So they also talk about what kind of practices are actually carried out in schools and lessons. And third is actually the orders of knowledge. And in this particularly, in the third paradigm, they are actually more interested in looking at the socio-political discourses and ideological discourses involving the materials. So why I brought this for you, because I thought that maybe you can explore more into this institute, and they have their online library resources where they have they mention about their publications, and they share the current work which is actually in progress. And besides that, this institute, if somebody is interested in textbook studies, they can also actually apply for a different kind of fellowships, because they offer fellowships for the young researchers and young scholars, and even the university professors as well. I myself actually was able to get one fellowship there for 2 weeks. So for 1 month and even for 3 months, they do offer kind of fellowships who are interested in textbook research. So coming back to the school language textbooks. So the meta heading says that the school language textbook is a neutral official documents, or they are ideological hypotheses. So people who are not part of the textbook studies they're teaching in classes, they might view textbooks as neutral resources, or they are only the pedagogical resources, or they are sources of information. And many people consider textbook knowledge as quite value-free, is something without any kind of ideological motivations. But there are many scholars, critical language scholars and critical education scholars, and they think that these textbooks and the curriculum, it is never neutral. globally. It's not only in the context of Pakistan, but if we look at the study of curriculum and textbooks, they always carry certain values. For example, Michael Apple is one of the well-known critical education theorists, and he says that, for example, the textbooks and curriculum, they always contain a hidden curriculum. So the concept of hidden curriculum is very important because this hidden curriculum is all about the kind of ideologies and the political motives, and there are certain like socio-cultural orientations which are involved in the textbooks and curriculum, and maybe teachers and the students in most cases they only use it for the source of information, but we have to look at it as researchers. We dig deeper into the ideological character of the curriculum and the textbooks. And one other scholar says, for example, these textbooks, they reproduce dominant meanings in the service of national policy interest. So this is a well-known, for example, many scholars have conducted research on how these textbooks and curriculum, they contain the national narrative, for example. So globally, the governments always try to bring their national narratives and national meanings in the textbooks and curriculum because of the national coherence and unity. And not only limited to the national narrative, but we see that now, for example, we are living in the for example, neoliberal era, and textbooks are not free from this neoliberal influences. So, for example, it's not only that textbooks talk about the local meanings and local culture, but they also bring some global ideologies. For example, neoliberalism is one ideology. So therefore, scholars suggest that there is still a global agenda, such as the neoliberalization of the world social order. And for that, we need to understand that what is neoliberalism as such. For example, neoliberalism is, let's say, in simple words, if I say, it may actually promote discourses of individualism. It may promote discourses of competition and entrepreneurship. So textbooks also bring actually some kind of discourses which it reinforce the neoliberal social world order. So textbooks are actually seen as they can be seen as normalizing certain ways of knowing, being, and doing. For example, teachers and learners who are in the classroom, they just use textbooks, and these textbook discourses, what they do, they try to actually normalize certain ways of knowing, being, and doing. What we know and how we know and who we are actually, that is actually reinforced by textbook discourses. So textbooks are not very much innocent, but they actually try to normalize certain ways. For example, if we are living in Pakistan, of course, there are certain political orientations in the textbooks, and these textbooks try to normalize these ways of knowing the reality around us, the way we have our own culture, our values, and our ideologies, and therefore we can say that these textbooks are viewed as the repository of different ideologies. So there are a number of ideologies that can be located within the textbook if we use certain theoretical and analytical lens. We can actually try to locate them. For example, what these ideologies are: ideologies of nationalism, for example. We can also locate the ideology of racism, neoliberalism, religion, and all these actually ideologies are presented in textbook as official truths. So the notion of official truth is interesting because maybe some people actually try to naturalize this official truth. For example, whatever is given in the textbook is considered as an absolute truth, but there is always some kind of distortion. There's always some kind of manipulation in the name of official truth. But for example, maybe some of you might know about a well-known book by K.K. Aziz, The Murder of History. For example, K.K. Aziz in this book actually he came to examine how textbooks in Pakistan, for example, they actually distort the history and overall the social knowledge and social understanding of the world. So this was the one view. Okay, textbooks are ideological documents, and they bring certain ideologies. But this is I would say, because throughout my own journey in PhD, I also was more focused on this ideological dimension of textbooks. But then I came to understand that This would be more over-deterministic view because we only look at the textbook from this ideological perspective. But there is always another side that we can study, and therefore textbooks are not mere ideological hypotheses. For example, yes, I think we cannot deny this. Textbooks are actually the content carriers. They have their content, but at the same time, they are very much socially alive artifacts. So there are a number of scholars who argue that textbooks do not only try to mold learners' identities into specific maybe culture and ideologies, but they also try to bring certain competing discourses. And these competing discourses, we mean that there are also some alternative realities, alternative truths as well. Official truth is not like all the time oppressive, but there are certain kind of alternative epistemologies, alternative realities, and that can actually help teachers and learners to negotiate their marginalized identities. For example, okay, on one hand, if there is a dominant ideology that underrepresent, for example, certain people in the classrooms who, for example, classrooms are always diverse. We know that there are people from different cultures and different religions and different classes. But if the textbook does not represent all of them, that means the textbook is actually oppressive because textbooks is not representing all. But the scholars suggest that we need to look at there may be certain discourses which may be inclusive as well. So therefore, they say their textbooks are also socially alive and they offer competing discourses and resistance. I would tell you in the coming slides how textbook shows competing discourses. So therefore, when a researcher prior says that documents can be considered both as containers as well as actors. So on one hand, they carry certain ideologies. At the same time, they are also actors. They help us actually negotiate our own identities as well. Now, this is a very important slide. Why? Because textbook language scholars especially, they have tried to categorize textbook research into three themes. They say that textbooks can be studied from three different perspectives. One is representation, another is interaction, and third is learning. For example, when you talk about representation perspective or theme in the textbook research, that focuses on, for example, certain questions that I have noted down from the study by German Kenol in 2021. For example, he says that from a representational perspective, there are a lot of questions that we can keep in mind when we are studying textbooks, whether in a school or college or anywhere. For example, how is textbook discourse designed or organized? What type of representations does it favor over others? So from this perspective, the way we talked about the textbook, they contain certain political orientation or ideologies. So these are actually representational perspectives. What type of knowledge or understanding of the social, cultural, and linguistic world does it promote? And the next question can be, for example, who are represented as legitimate speakers and interlocutors? So, of course, when we are trying to study textbook discourses, we want to understand who is represented as a legitimate speaker or whose knowledge is considered legitimate, for example, whose knowledge is promoted, whose knowledge is underrepresented. So these are the important questions as a textbook researcher that you always try to look into the textbook discourses. Who are represented as a carrier of the culture and who are considered as a legitimate users of the language. So there are a number of questions that you can always ask when you are studying textbook. Who is represented as a legitimate learner? As I told you that in classroom, for example, we have the diverse learners from different socio-economic and socio-cultural backgrounds. What cultural, social, and political ideologies are at play in these representations? So from representation perspective, we have a number of questions that we can keep in mind. And most of the textbook research so far has been carried out in this particular theme, actually. And then the second, which is interaction and learning, this is, I would say, very much underexplored area in textbook studies. And now the scholars they've turned their attention to study these two perspectives in textbook research. For example, what kind of question can we ask in interaction and learning? For example, okay, how are textbooks, for example, discourses and representations circulate in the classrooms? So if we look at the teachers and learners, they are actually using the textbooks in the classroom. So how do these textbook discourses circulate among teachers and among students? Whether they are like receiving these discourses passively, are they critically engaged with the knowledge given in the textbook discourses? Or they do actually try to negotiate different identities. So this is where the notion of interaction and learning is important in the textbook research. The second question, for example, we can ask is, how do teachers and students interact with the textbook? How do they position themselves towards textbook discourse? For example, of course, when we talk about teachers and learners, they are not passive recipient of knowledge, but they are social beings, and they are thinking beings, and therefore they of course have their reactions and their responses to textbook knowledge. So as a researcher, we can always study how the teachers and the learner, they position themselves in relation to textbook discourses. To what extent do they negotiate textbook representation? So that's a very important question, whether they negotiate it or they are passively recipient of these representations. What strategies do they deploy to do so? And how do they respond to the ways in which they are positioned by the textbook as teachers and learners? For example, let's say in one of our recent study that we carried out on are we equal citizens, for example, we tried to examine how the minority students in Pakistan, for example, how they view language textbook discourses. But of course, our study was more focused on interviews, but there is still possibility that people can conduct, for example, critical ethnographic research, and they can actually see what is happening in the real classroom situation when the teacher is teaching a specific textbook, and then how are the responses of the students shaped, and what are the teachers' responses towards the content. So that's an important aspect of research that can be carried out. Now, another perspective that we need to understand from a textbook research is one of the scholars is Karen Zoger, and she has done a wonderful research on textbooks, language textbooks especially. And one of the articles that she has written is the language textbooks windows to the world. So basically, she has tried to focus on how textbook studies is conducted globally, and what are the different perspectives that we can actually focus on as researchers. For example, she has tried to categorize 5 different areas from which perspective we can actually conduct research. Let's say one is the national studies. So as language textbook scholar, you can always situate yourself in the national studies that focus on which countries are represented and how. So as a part of national studies, you can always look into the national identities and discourses which are actually embedded, or they are part of the language textbook. So you ask yourself as a researcher that which countries are represented in the textbooks and how they're represented. For example, maybe there are certain bilateral relations between the countries which are represented, and maybe some countries are always at they are not in a friend relation, and how one other country is represented. Let's say how India, for example, how India is represented in Pakistani textbooks, and how Pakistan is represented in Indian textbooks. Likewise, the countries which are always at regressed on, they misrepresent themselves. Even in one of the studies, there are many studies where scholars have studied how, for example, the USSR, the Russian ideologies, they are portrayed in the American school textbooks, and likewise how America is represented in the Russian textbooks. So from national studies, we can always talk about these perspectives. And then the second area for the textbook researchers is very interesting, that the citizenship education studies. As part of this, we can actually look at the key problems of the world, how these key problems of the world are represented in the textbook or in the curriculum. For example, how the climate change addressed in the textbooks, how the environment and how the inequality and the poverty. So these different kind of social problems, and they can always be studied in the textbook research. That comes under the citizenship education studies. And the third perspective that she mentioned is the cultural studies. As a part of textbook researcher, the textbook research, you can always study different cultural and social identities. So how textbooks construct specific cultural and social identities. For example, by cultural identities, we mean that how is social class represented, how is gender and sexuality and ethnicity, nationality, language, race, religion, education, how are these different cultural identities of people, they are actually represented in the school textbooks and the curriculum. And of course, as I say that when we look at the textbooks from this ideological perspective, then there's always specific ideologies which are actually favored while others are actually marginalized. And therefore, as a critical researchers, we see, for example, how is a gender, how are male represented and how are female, and how about class, for example, how are the people from the lower economic background, they are represented in school textbooks, and how the elite class represented. And likewise, we have the social identities that is actually about different category like teachers, business people, workers, farmers, celebrities, refugees, or engineers, school children. So how are these people represented in the school textbook or school knowledge? And then fourth one, which is very important, is the post-colonial studies. So we can also study textbook from the post-colonial perspective, and these very important questions are like, are aspects of the world history represented? Inequalities due to colonialism and imperialism. So of course, these textbooks that we teach in the schools, they also can be situated in the historical context, and there are always certain colonial narratives which always, they persist in the school knowledge. And therefore, we can study these colonial discourses, like the discourses of linguistic hegemony, cultural hegemony, racialized identities or subjectivities, and how is, for example, white knowledge and this white norms, they are actually reinforced and they are taught in the school. And we also have conducted one study. I conducted recently one study with Dr. Hassan Sayed, and it's actually in review. We also try to learn how Pakistani school textbooks, especially Sindh textbook board Jamshoro, they contain the white traces or the white norms and the white curriculum. So this actually comes under the decolonization studies. So for example, there is an ongoing research on decolonizing language education, decolonizing curriculum. So as a part of this decolonization struggle, as researchers, we have to deconstruct these racial linguistic ideologies and this is the white curriculum and the white knowledge in the textbooks, in the favor of local knowledge and the local ideologies and epistemologies. And then the fourth aspect that she has mentioned is transnational studies. As a part of textbook research, we can always see, for example, all the links between different parts of the world represented. So of course, textbooks are not only now the national document, but they can carry like some transnational aspects as well. For example, transnational infrastructure and communication, transnational mobility, for example, how tourism is promoted in school textbooks, like how transnational organizations, they are actually brought into the school textbooks. And likewise, we can study transnational flows of ideas, discourses, and practices. So as a researcher, as a textbook researcher, we have to situate ourselves, for example, from which perspective I am carrying out research. And then again, as I mentioned, three themes: representation, learning, and interaction. So we always have to be very much careful about these particular areas when we are conducting research on textbooks. Now, from theoretical perspective, this is very important that as a critical discourse studies perspective, we have a number of theoretical possibilities that we can actually draw on in our research. For example, one important question as a critical discourse studies researcher is whether CDA or the critical discourse studies is a single theory or is a multiple theories or models. So basically, critical discourse analysis is not a unified or a universal or singular theory, but it contains a number of theoretical orientations. It contains a number of analytical orientations. And as a CDA researcher, we have a number of possibilities that we can use. And especially, for example, I have tried to divide it into 4 categories here. And even this may not be the limited one, we can also go beyond that. So for example, I have mentioned here one critical discourse studies that can cover like these 3 perspectives: socio-cognitive studies, For example, we have Wayne Dyack, who is a known researcher in the critical discourse analysis, and he is considered one of the founding father of the CDA perspective in critical applied linguistics. And then we have a discourse historical method, and then we have a dialectical relational approach. Because I don't have much time to talk about all of these, but I just wanted to bring these different perspectives so that maybe you can explore on your own. So, of course, these three areas, for example, these three theoretical frameworks, they have their own interest and they have their own inclinations towards ideology. For example, in socio-cognitive studies, it's not only about discourses, but it also connects discourses with cognition, how our mind actually, or how our brain actually processes these discourses. And likewise, discourse historical method, Wadok is a known researcher, known theorist, and she has actually talked about these historical perspective on discourses, how certain discourses are historically constituted. And then this Norman Fairclough is most a highly cited researcher, a theorist in CDA, and his dialectical relational approach is very much important. And under CDA, this critical discourse studies, there's another perspective which is which I have separated because I feel that it is like a post-structural orientation. This critical discourse studies was basically influenced by critical theory and Marxism as a school of thought, and with the time it got enriched by a different orientation, and especially in 1970s we see that like we have the post-structuralism as an emerging theory in the social sciences and humanities. And that influences actually the field of critical discourse, which are actually emerged in the 1990s. So CDA is not quite old. It's basically, it emerged in the 1990s, and then it was also influenced by this post-structural orientation. And within that, we have a number of philosophers and thinkers who have a lot to offer to this CDA perspective. For example, Becton heteroglossia is very important concept that we can use in CDA. I also used in one of my papers recently in combination with the Fairclough's dialectical relational approach. And then we have Derrida. If you want to study Derrida, then the concept of deconstruction can help you. And then we have the Foucault, and Foucault is he is one of the important theorists in the discourse studies perspective, discourse research. And of course, Foucault is very complex, and Foucault has a lot to offer in the discourse, and he has really a lot of conceptual categories that he offers for the analysis of discourse. And then we have Judith Butler. She proposed the concept of performativity, which is also used in the gender studies perspectives. So one thing I would say that, for example, these different theoretical possibilities are there for us as researchers, but of course, we cannot use all of them, and nor can we use only one. It's up to us as researchers, and our research questions and our aims and objectives, they actually decide, they help us to make decisions about these theoretical orientation and choices. So for example, in my study, I looked at, I used it with DRA and with Becton. In other studies, I have used like Fairclough and the Foucault together. And somewhere else, I have used only Foucault. So basically, we have to familiarize ourselves with some ontological and epistemological assumptions as well. Based on them, then we make decisions about which theoretical framework can we use. And then the third important orientation, which is emerging now, which is the critical multimodal discourse studies. This actually orientation talks about that we need to tell people or linguists that there is more than language. So when we analyze textbooks, it's not only the language that we need to understand and analyze, but we also need to understand that communication is multimodal, and textbooks are multimodal documents. It has like images, it has different fonts, it has different format choices. So all these different visuals and images, they also help, they also contribute to the meaning-making processes. So it's not on the language that is the center of analysis, but we have to analyze the images and the visuals and other non-verbals which are used in the textbooks. So this book is very important if somebody is interested reading images. It was actually written in 1996 by Crest and Leon. And recently, David Machine from Sweden, he is a well-known scholar who has been writing on critical multimodal discourse studies that you can explore. And apart from these three orientations, and we have now another strand which is emerging. It is cultural discourse studies. So it's not now critical discourse, but now this is moving from C for critical to C for actually cultural discourse studies. Why cultural discourse studies? Because there's a debate now that most of the research, most of the theories and methods that have been used in critical discourse studies, they come from the global north. They are actually from the West, and the Western scholars, Western theorists, they have proposed theories, and these theories are actually like transported to the entire world, including our own world. And we actually uncritically use these theories to analyze the data from our own context. And therefore, we need to develop our local theoretical frameworks. We need to analyze the data from our own particular perspectives. And therefore, this cultural discourse studies is very important. And we see here one of the leading scholar is Shi Zhu. He is from China, a Chinese professor, and he also founded one research journal, which is very well known, and Journal of Multicultural Discourses. If you will go to the website of this journal, you will find out a number of scholars from the North and the South both, and they are actually proposing different frameworks to analyze data in discourse analysis actually. Like we have one scholar from North America, from Latin America, and she has tried to decolonize critical discourse studies with their own Latin American perspective. And recently, I myself actually tried to bring African and Asian perspective into the critical discourse studies perspective. So I actually drew on Gugi Thianggo's perspective on the notion of global ethics, and then I tried to bring Southern feminism into Syria perspective, because most of the research in gender studies has been carried out from the Northern perspective, and Northern theorists, they have proposed, like Judith Butler and Baxter and Whedon. A number of feminist scholars from the North have proposed theories, and we actually used them uncritically to analyze data in our context. So I propose that we can actually use the voices from the Southern feminists especially, and we have, even Southern feminism cannot be like, it cannot be a singular episteme, but we have again a kind of different diversities in the Southern feminism. For example, Muslim feminism is also a growing growing strand of scholarship that look at how Islam can be used to reclaim empowerment and agency in the discourses. So now I would come to, by the way, if I run short of time, then please do let me know. So these are actually some of my observations about English textbooks that I have been examining or studying as part of my doctoral research. So for example, we have this gender ideology that I have examined in my study. And then we have this competing discourses. I will be talking about some of them in my upcoming slides. And then coloniality is also part of these textbook research that taught in Pakistan, in Sindh province. Then we have like the concept of alterity and otherness, how otherness is constituted. And then we have this concept of nationalist rhetoric, how national identities are built in textbooks in Pakistan. Then we have this class subjectivities, environmental degradation, and then how is religion represented in textbooks. So these are some of the observations, and I have also carried out my own research on these particular themes, and some of them have been published and some of them are already in review. So I will be talking about a few studies. For example, from the representational perspective, as I told you that we have three themes in textbook research. So from a representational view, I studied the concept of nation. How is a nation built in textbooks in Pakistan? How the notion of alterity, by alterity I mean otherness. So by otherness we mean that there are always some dominant discourses which favor specific people, while there are other groups of people who are actually marginalized and they are presented as other. Their representation is minimal or marginal. And then we have competing discourses, and therefore I have written here rethinking textbooks as ideological hypothesis, because most of the research in Pakistani context are globally that focused on only ideological aspect of the textbooks. But in my research, I also tried to focus on this notion of competing discourses as well. So, for example, the main research question that I wanted to investigate is how is the national subjecthood built in Pakistani English textbooks, and who is represented as other, or how is alterity constituted? So this is a very important question. Who is represented as other in the textbooks, and what type of competing discourses are available to learners in textbooks? So I analyzed 12 English language textbooks, which are published by Sindh Textbook Board Jamshoro. And based on that, actually, I used two theoretical orientations. One is a Fairclough's dialectical approach. Fairclough's dialectical relational approach actually helped me to understand the ideological perspective of the textbook. While I was talking about the competing discourses are different subject position, then Foucault's writings were very, very much helpful. As I told you that our research question, they guide us to make decisions about the theoretical choices. So therefore, I made these. I made a combination, or I used a theoretical triangulation of these two theorists. So what are the findings I have just brought in maybe in a nutshell? The national subjecthood is constituted by different discursive indexes in textbook. For example, the religion is dominantly used in Pakistani textbooks to construct a national identity, and gender subjectivity, for example, how female is represented or how women are represented in Pakistani textbooks, they construct specific gendered national subjectivities, and to promote specific languages like promotion of local languages and promotion of Urdu, for example, and then the literature, especially local literature or the national literature, and then the patriotic sentiment. So these were some of the discourse indexes that were actually identified in my research that actually construct the national identity. And apart from this, the second question, the other, for example, I came to understand that we have two types of others actually in language textbooks. For example, one is the internal other, that's the religious minorities in Pakistan. They are minimally represented from the table here. I have mentioned here, for example, like out of 434 lessons from grade 1 to 12, there were only 4 lessons that related to minorities only. So that's like 0.9% of the representation. And then 99 lessons, like 23% of the lessons, they were actually related to the nation building. So from this, we can understand that how these internal other, like Hindus, Christians, and Sikhs and other minorities, they are represented. And likewise, we have the external other. This is very commonly explored area, and most of the researchers in the past have already talked about this. For example, how India is represented in Pakistani textbooks. And again, even in the revised textbooks that were recently revised in 2022, I came to know that the discourses of like about India still persist, and India is still represented as other, like how textbook construct our attitudes towards our neighboring countries. And apart from that, I also came to know that there are also competing discourses. And by competing discourses, mean there were also some units that celebrated this minorities, and I call this celebration like 4 only units, 0.9%, and that's why I say the competing discourses were present. And then the second article, as a part of my research, it was about the as I said that we have 3 perspectives, like representation and then learning interaction. And this article actually relates to the second theme of textbook research, learning and interaction. So I actually try to understand the teachers' perspectives about the use of textbooks in classes. And therefore, I used Foucauldian power relations and possibility for agency in textbook research. So here we can see that I have used the title like genus-based character of English language pedagogy. That means the textbook English language pedagogy does not only construct specific dominant identities, but it has like genus-based character. That means it has also some other agentive dimension as well. So my research question was for like how do English language teachers They describe their experiences about engaging with the textbook content in relation to the dominant discourses and diverse identities of learners in classrooms. So I actually interviewed 40 English language teachers in 10 cities of Sindh province of Pakistan in 2022. And I focused on both government and non-government schools, but they were the non-elite private schools. And a part of my theoretical orientation, I focused on Foucauldian power relations and agency, because when I viewed discourses as constructing different subject positions. It's not only the dominant subject positions, but they were also teachers were also in a position to negotiate, and they were also able to counter certain discourses in the classroom, and therefore I chose the Foucauldian power relations. And the findings suggest that besides disciplinary techniques of surveillance and examination, states of domination maintained through officially sanctioned discourses and apparatuses, teachers also seem to exercise their agency by engaging in struggles against institutionalized discourses that underpin the very existential question, who are we? So teachers were not passive. Yes, some of the teachers, they appreciated, they recognize or acknowledge the discourses which are present in the in textbooks, and they transferred those discourses in the classroom as they were, without critically engaging themselves with these questions of knowledge and power, and how they can construct specific identities of the learners. They simply transfer that content. But some of the teachers seem to be quite well aware of how textbooks can actually construct identities, and therefore they try to counter them with their alternative ways of knowledge, and they try to bring other resources in the classroom, not only textbooks which were prescribed by this government and by the schools throughout the province, but they also try to bring specific alternative resources in the classrooms. So such a question facilitates learning experience of diverse learning in classroom and help them negotiate their identity. So when teachers engage themselves critically and actively with the content, they actually try to include different learners in the classroom, because they were aware that classrooms are very diverse, and textbooks do not include all of the learners in the classroom, and therefore they considered it very important that as the teachers, they should bring other material. And then I have recently another study, which was again from the representational view, and where I tried to, I actually collaborated with two researchers from Pakistan. And what we did, we combined two approaches, Fairclough and then Becton. And we focused on poetry, because textbooks are always divided into different categories, and different genres are there. We have prose and we have poetry, we have language activities. So as a part of our research, we can always focus on specific things. Like maybe we can analyze the language, content of the language practice, language exercises and all that. But in this study, we focused on how poetry is used or deployed in language textbooks to promote specific ideologies, and whether they are also they have certain alternative views as well. Therefore, we use heteroglossic realities. That means textbooks are like heteroglossic documents. They have some monoglossic or authoritarian voices which are embedded in the textbooks, but as well as we have some other realities as well. So I can show you here what we did. We actually focused on two research questions: that what ideological representation does poetry in Pakistani school textbooks embody? So of course, poetry is not neutral, and poetry is also poetry functions in a similar way, the way the prose does in terms of ideological discourses. So we try to identify these ideological representation in the poetry in the school textbooks. And then the second question we try to explore was, in what way does the poetry taught in Pakistani classes provide spaces for alternative realities and voices in language classes? So we wanted to understand that if the poetry was completely ideological, or it also has something to offer to the learners where they can negotiate their diverse identities and their subject positions. So again, we analyzed 12 English language textbooks, which were produced by Sindh Textbook Board, Jamshoro, and we triangulated. We use a theoretical triangulation of Fairclough's dialectical approach, because the very close dialectical rational approach was very much helpful to understand this ideological messages in the textbook research, and Bechtin's idea on dialogism and heteroglossia, that was helpful to us as researchers to trace or to locate these alternative realities or the heteroglossic dimensions in the textbooks. So we came to know that poetry texts actually they contain certain ideological themes. For example, they promote linguistic sexism, how language is used in the poetry. They actually construct like a linguistic sexism, and they also promote national sentiments and also religious and spiritual ethos. So these are some of the ideological or monoglossic or authoritative voices that were located or identified in the language textbooks. And we have also shown in the frequency, for example, how many poems were related to the ideological content and how many poems were actually like heteroglossic. And in addition, we also found that reference to poems that offer learners alternative perspectives. By alternative perspective, I mean there were some poems which were actually talked about the curiosity and the questioning and the struggle and recognizing truth as a multifaceted entity. So the poems also engage learners curiously, and they encourage learners to question, and they engage learners to actually engage in struggles of different kinds. So therefore, poetry documents or textbooks can be considered as a heteroglossic document rather than mere ideological hypothesis. And then this is the last study that I want to focus on. As I say that from theoretical perspective, we see that now a number of scholars globally, they are actually trying to talk about decolonizing knowledge, decolonizing theories, and decolonizing research as such. So I myself try to focus on how critical discourse studies, because I was studying CDA for over 3 years and I was using in my PhD. Then I came to realize that CDA is dominated by the Western theorists and Western scholars, because it was originated by the Western scholars in Europe, and therefore I came to believe that there was actually absence of the local epistemology or the theories from the South actually. So I try to bring African and Asian perspective in CDA research, and by African I mean that I try to refer to Ngugi Thiong'o's globaletics, which is a very important concept, and I try to integrate it into the research, and then I try to connect it with the Southern feminism. So I can show you how I did. For example, my focus was basically decolonizing critical discursive perspective. This was my major focus, and my focus in this sense was on the feminist research, because CDA can be used in a number of different research perspectives. So I focused on only feminist perspective here, and I came to know that it is dominated by the North-centric framework like Judith Butler, and then we have Chris Whedon and Baxter and Vodog. So most of the people in global South and even in Pakistan, for example, whenever we want to study gender, we just try to use any framework from the West. We use Judith Butler and the Whedon and the Baxter and Vodog, and then try to analyze our data. And of course, when we try to uncritically bring the theoretical orientations from one part of the world to other part of the world, we cannot actually address our issues adequately. So of course, I don't mean that we don't have to use those frameworks, but we have to use them in dialogue with how scholars in our world, they look at the realities and in the knowledge. And therefore, I came to read about Southern framework in CDA, which was very important, and that helped me to rethink my own position. And that was actually Michelle Lazar. She is from Singapore, and she actually proposed she synthesized these northern and southern frameworks into feminist CDA perspective, and that was actually written in 2005 and 7. And she combined this critical and post-structural orientations and multimodality into the feminist CDA. But when I studied deeply into the Lazar's framework, I came to know that even the global South is very much diverse, and Lazar's only represented the one specific perspective from the south. But if we look at South Asia, we have different southern feminisms from India, from Bangladesh, from Pakistan. So these kind of different theoretical struggles and epistemic struggles, they were not represented in the feminist CDA perspective, basically. So I try to enrich and aid this feminist CDA perspective, and specifically I focused on the Muslim feminism. But we can, of course, add more to it. For example, we can bring how different countries and different scholars in the Middle East and other parts of South Asia, they view actually the Muslim struggles. But of course, when I say Muslim feminism, it is somehow very much common, because it is proposed by scholars from the Middle East and from the South Asia as well, and even those who are working in the West as well. So then I refer to this Muslim feminism, how Muslim feminist scholars, they use Islam as not as a source of ideology which is used to manipulate people, but Islam as an ideology, Islam as a theory, Islam as a religion that can be used by people in the global south as a source of empowerment and as a source of agency as well. And a number of Muslim feminist scholars, if you just try to dig out, if you search about Muslim feminism, you will find out a number of leading scholars who have been working on how Muslim feminism, that means is how post-patriarchal interpretation of Islam can help us to undo this ideological function of Islam that is used in South Asia and in the global south, which is more interpreted by the males. So they actually question this patriarchal interpretation of Islam, and they bring their feminist voice into the study of religions and theology to reconceptualize and re-theorize Islam as a religion from the feminist perspective. So I use that perspective in my CDA research, and then I use this global ethics perspective, which is proposed by Gugi Thiago, and this intellectual network, this framework, it will suggest that we have to go for a global intellectual network with no central point. So global ethics suggests that, for example, the way we rely more on the north, and north is the center, and then all the theories developed in the north, they are exported to the south and other parts of the world. But now in the global ethical perspective, there's no center. So neither south nor the north, they are the center, but we have the global intellectual network, a spectrum of epistemologies from the south and north. So we can use epistemologies from the south and north in dialogue, and we can use this dialogue actually to understand the issue at best. That's what the main message of the global ethics is all about. So that was my theoretical contribution. Recently, I got this article published in the Journal of Multicultural Discourses that I showed you. And these are a few studies which are forthcoming on textbooks. I have used this framework that I have proposed in my study that was published in my upcoming article, Gender, Islam, and ELT. So for example, if I want to analyze the discourses of gender in the school textbooks, then I did not try to use the Western theoretical frameworks, but the way I say that we have to develop this in relation to the South as well. So I use this Muslim feminist perspective to analyze the data from the textbooks actually. So that is submitted to one journal, which is a leading journal, Applied Linguistics, and that's submitted. And today I just checked that they are thinking about the review selection, so there's a possibility that will be sent for the review. And the second article, which is in review, that I have written with Dr. Hassan Sayed, and it is about the ontological return of the dam. We have tried to trace the coloniality in English curriculum and pedagogy in post-colonial Pakistan. So these are the studies that we are expecting in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sir Waka, for your precious time. Our forum critical educators, as well as education society, is grateful for you. We will take few more minutes to entertain the questions. So, any questions? So, any questions from our students?
Dr. Balanji.
Thank you, Vakar. I'm Dr. Kulvind. Really inspired from your whatever current studies and forthcoming. Just a recent study about it's a CDA while applying like a Islamic feminism. I don't know what we call Muslim feminism. So again, that's I will read it, but in West can in Western society or Western scholars nowadays they are discussing more queerness with feminism, and I don't know because in Orthodox Islamic perspective or maybe those who are believing in enlightened kind of Islam. Did you find some scholars from like those who believe in Muslim feminism, how they unpack that from queerness or what's their approaches about it? Just that's my question, but I appreciate your thought of folks. Thank you.
Dr. Vakar, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'm Abdul Hamid Kumbar is talking to you, sir. How are you, sir? Happy?
Good. Yeah.
I'm so delighted to hear you this very insightful, insightful ideas relevant to the textbooks. That how textbooks basically is instrumentalizing and socializing us to be something, a kind of a different sort of being that we are as we are. Right. So this particular sort of insight, and I'm asking you that's very, the critical question relevant as I'm thinking over it, that how far this particular textbook can be re-evaluated, right? In that particular sense, in terms of inclusiveness. So this is an inclusiveness basically is needed. So far as the textbook currently is functioning is a kind of instrumentalism, right? So, and that is, preparing us to be a kind of a different being, a different subject. But now the question is that we have to break this particular cycle. We have to have a kind of a curriculum that prepares us to be, selflessness rather than. That includes all sort of beings as a being, rather than a kind of, specific identity as, for example, the imported sort of Northwest scholars basically is producing now. So this is my questions.
Anyone from the students? Students, please.
तमाम आपको सिंधी में सवाल करना चाहे तो करे
सिंधी में अंग्रेजी का होना है, सिंधी उर्दू whatever you.
जेके तहां निसाब जे हवाले सां पढ़िया हा. But as of the students I'm teaching them the Sindhi, especially the Sindhi subject that I have been teaching them. So they may ask the question in Sindhi language per se.
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल मुझे सिंधी इंडिया बाकी इंडिया ना
Assalamu alaikum. My question is, as you have said, textbooks are not neutral, poetry is not neutral. So I'm curious to know from your studies and the work you have done, then how to select a text for our students to teach as a prospective teacher. Because I'm a prospective teacher and I have to teach in a class. So I have to select a particular text to teach in the classroom. So how I can select a text that should not be, partial.
Exactly. Basically, as I said in my research, that the textbooks online, where textbooks basically सिर्फ ideological documents होना चाहिए, because they are not only ideological documents.
Sir, you are requested to please speak in Urdu, like we are having some of the students who can't understand the Sindhi. Thank you so much.
And then English, okay? So
English
basically, so as I said in my study that textbooks are not only ideological documents, especially with the revisions recently observed. I came to identify that textbooks also offer like alternative realities as well. As I said, that poetry documents, poetry texts were heteroglossy in nature. So some of the poems were ideological, while others were actually there to offer some alternative reality, promoting curiosity, questioning among the learners. So now I believe that, okay, on one hand, we see that textbooks are not neutral as such, but they have certain ideologies. So this is where the role of teachers actually is very important. And there are scholars who are working on the textbook pedagogy, how the teachers can be made aware of these textbook discourses, and how teachers can engage themselves critically with this textbook knowledge in the classrooms. So I believe that classrooms are very much active knowledge sites, and teachers and learners, they do not only passively engage with the textbook knowledge in the classroom, and they do actually bring their own voices. They have their own histories, they have their own realities, and teachers and learners, they have their a rich of experiences, so they can bring those experiences in the dialogue with the textbooks. And of course, we as teachers and the learners, we don't have a role in decision making about the textbook. There are certain specific government body that actually designs and establish. We can always work on them, and we can critically evaluate and engage in the classes accordingly. So our teaching matters a lot now, teaching and learning strategies.
Sir, what about the question of Dr. Guzlin?
Queerness and feminism.
Yeah, I actually wanted to answer this question. I came to know about different Muslim feminist scholars. For example, one of them is Leela Ahmed at the University of Harvard, and she has been actually working on how Muslim feminist thought, or how the feminist Islamic strand can be used in actually in different kind of social sciences and humanities research to just challenge the stereotypes of the Islam, which is also done in the US and in America and Europe, Italy. For example, how the West represents Islam. There's always with the negative connotations. Islam is like something which oppresses people, and I try to investigate very important instance of the hijab, for example, in the textbooks. For example, how is the hijab interpreted in the West? And people actually think that hijab is like a kind of operation that is exercised by Islam upon the women in the global South. But these Muslim feminist scholars, they have actually tried to come up with a different interpretation of hijab, for example, and how Muslim women in the global South, they reclaim their agency and empowerment through hijab. So one of the interpretation is like hijab is considered as a kind of a universal operation by the Western scholars. But at the same time, we have different interpretations. We have to understand the lived experiences and views and opinions of the people in the global South to understand how Islam actually works and can be interpreted.
Wakar, sorry, because when I was in USA, I was reading. So they also cite, sometimes they also cite Gandhi. They also cite one scholar. He was in UCLA. He married with one woman, and he allowed her wife to say azan in mosque. He said, okay, women can do azan. So there were some scholars in Canada. I forget his name, but he was also bringing some some other way like unorthodox Islamic view that was some way also kind of a match with queerness, feminism, even gender identities also feeling nowadays. They would also give some interpretation from Islamic perspective. They say the text which is written in Quran that can be understood like this way. So although we have a very few people, as you mentioned, Leela and some others, so I was more interested to know this kind of scholar, and maybe we need more research to decolonize, but as well as we should bring like those perspectives of Islam that's also should not violate the fundamental of the Islamic understanding or religion.
Yeah, and recently, maybe I can mention two more scholars from in Pakistan. We have a Dr. Rifat Hassan. She is a very leading Muslim feminist scholar, and in the US, and especially during the 1970s, 1980s, when there was like a Ziyad Islamization project launched in Pakistan, then Rifat Hassan and Asma Barlas, these two scholars actually, they were on the forefront to counter how Islam was misused by the Zia to actually control people and masses, and they brought a feminist interpretation of Islam, which was very interesting, I think.
Okay, we would like to have a group photo with you, like all the students and the teachers, of course. So we would like to have you on the screen, and we'll stand in front of the screen to take a picture, capture this moment with you, right? So
Yeah.
so
So
invite over all the students to come down.
all audience, like you all are requested to please come in front.
Can all
Have a
of them
picture.
better here?
And like put your hands together for some Sarvakar.
Yeah, a round of applause.
Once again, thank you so much, sir. So you all are requested to please come in front.
Yep.
Sir, you are requested to please turn off your screen with which you are presenting, and like your picture will be wider.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is a new innovative way of taking picture. The girls can हिन screen जे साम्हूं बीह सघो था हितां हीअं सॼा अची वेंदा वकार जूं ॿ screens आहिनि सो मतिलबु वकार चओ था
Come down, please.
the boys can sit down, yeah, bend their knees and allow the girls to stand up. ॿ तस्वीरूं थी सघनि थी पहिरीं यार, why do
Yes.
yeah, we can have one picture, the ladies first. Well, ladies or boys, like in one group, and ladies and boys. Let's make it include. Yeah, so चलो बहुत ही आप पहले सही किया हमारे पास भी करेंगे जी मतलब सरकार के द्वारा 5 minutes yeah sir ताची में लोग पिक्चर भी सब एकदम पीछा है hey are you all ready?
Yes.
I showed for you last time. Yeah, but like those of you who are done with the picture, like बाकी जो लोग हैं वो आ जाए अरे साथी सर thank you very much. We invite you to, when you visit Pakistan, come at Sukkur IBA. Yeah, he will meet and gather. Wakar, like you are invited, and like we will have a wonderful time here. So we anya achanda student achanda vyapo like you those sare wo aaye na. Thank you very much once again, Wakar. के मतलब ता मुझे like time कढ़ो है मतलब मेरे बारन के like you enlightened them so much, you enlightened me so much.
Welcome, thank you.
Wakar, thank you. So nice of you.
Hamid साहब आप सुनानी ना हो तो.
हाँ साइंस बिल्कुल है
Namaste banyak मुलाकात नसीब connect करना.
सुबह
सही हिरा की सही जो चेक देखो सेशन में मॉडरेट किया हुआ है एग्जांपल पिक्चर दिलान और दिलान में लाइन चाहिए भाई आई थिंक लाइक वकार तने नहीं जो ये मतलब पाण थोड़ो ये कयो तो जे मतलब थोड़ो ये स्क्रीन जगह जाहिर थे बाकी पाण ये राउंड में था भी हमारा इतना जरा ना हो ठीक है yeah now I think like the screen is Wakar is visible थोड़ा कोई थी तू थोड़ा कोई थी
साहिल त्याचे ना हेना साहिल तू साहिल हेना बाईक सही आहे असं ना ना वीडियो ये क्यों सही वकार दे पॉइंट क्यों सही वीडियो सभी पॉइंट क्यों ना है दाही पॉइंट क्यों है ना हसन लाइक बाकी को जो हसन रहेला ना हसन अच्छे हसन आ जाओ हसन कब बोला यहाँ कहाँ मतलब यहाँ अरे come on yeah once again pointing to okay like come on let's point Babar Jabbar done sorry take
Now done.
thank you very much Vakar पाण राते में आयो and पाण like and we'll send you the pictures like for you to like add in your page or whatever so मां चाह तो साहिल के मुख्य मोकली तो मां ताकि thank you very much once again for your time Vakar thank you very much thank you so much sir thank you Thank you very much, all the students for coming along for the sessions. A round of applause for all the students. When it possible.